Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jabbar Shumate with the Oklahoma City Urban League. I serve as Vice President of Community Convening and Social Justice, and we're here to talk about all things expungement. We have some exciting things happening in our state in terms of real reform around our processes and criminal justice reform, but specifically around expungement. And really there's somewhat of a great group of people working to help Oklahoma really be innovative and join some other states around the country in really rolling out for our state a Clean Slate Initiative for those who've been justice involved. So I'm honored today to have my good friend, Mr. Damion Shade here from Oklahoma. Actually, he has several titles, but I think in one sense of capacity, he's the project manager for Prosper OK at the Oklahoma Policy Institute, which is doing some dynamic things. We'll let him share about that. But he's also been with the Oklahoma Policy Institute, working as a policy analyst in criminal justice reform for several years in Oklahoma. And Damion came to us by way of, I was joking with him earlier, Jackson, Mississippi, but I've never really heard the story of how he got here or really got to this work. So we want to open up and let Damion just kind of share with us who he is, and why he does what he does. And we'll roll into some questions about expungement. Damion.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that introduction and for inviting me to speak about such an important topic here in Oklahoma. As you said, I'm from Jackson, Mississippi originally. My mom and I actually moved here when I was about 13. She got a job opportunity here and decided to take us across the country and kind of start over fresh in a new place. And so I've called Oklahoma home basically off and on since then. I've left a few times for school and various things like that, but this is my home now. What really led me to this work, it's funny, I was a teacher for about a decade here in Oklahoma, working with kids who, fifth and sixth graders predominantly, who did English language learning. A lot of kids who had dyslexia and those sorts of issues. And we would do really focused reading and language work with them. And through a process of me kind of doing that work, I got an opportunity to write about education policy here in Oklahoma and kind of policy around particularly things that had to do with child development and really developing those life skills in the classroom. And through that, I began writing about drug policy, wrote about the opioid crisis in Oklahoma fairly early, as it was kind of being reported in Pittsburgh County and some of the places where now we know there were a significant amount of overdoses happening. And that kind of led me to the criminal justice policy work that I do now, really working on the opioid crisis and the way that it intersected with so many other problems in society is really what led me here.
Great. I know you've done a great deal of work, and thank you for your service in our classroom. But as you studied probably the expungement processes of states across the nation, could you give us a little bit of insight into Oklahoma's expungement process and what might make that good or bad?
So first, let's define that term because it can sound a little heady if you haven't heard it before. Expungement just means allowing individuals to seal court records or arrest records. And this prevents the public, but not law enforcement, from having access to that information. And in Oklahoma, what that effectively means is the record is hidden from public view. So law enforcement, again, can still see that record in case someone had a later offense or something like that. But for the purposes of really education employment, and housing, which are the big areas where we see barriers for people who are justice involved, you can have certain records cleared. I'd say one of the biggest limitations to Oklahoma's system is the cost, how expensive it can be and how complicated it can be. If you go to OSBI, which is the state law enforcement criminal records repository here in Oklahoma, if you go to their website, they actually have a graphic that highlights some of the costs and the process of the overall expungement process. And according to their records and estimates from 2017, hiring an attorney on average cost about $500 to $1,500. An average of about $150 an hour. You typically have to pay all of your court fines and fees, which is a huge barrier for lots of people. As we know, many Oklahomans have thousands and thousands of dollars of criminal court fines and fees. And as we know, 80% of criminal defendants are indigent, meaning they can't afford an attorney. So that's a big impediment. Just the attorney and the fines and fees is another piece. You have to gather your case history and your arrest record. So that's more money you have to pay to OSBI for a criminal record history check. You have to pay a $150 fee to OSBI as well for the final court order. And usually for most district or municipal courts, there is some type of fee that you end up having to pay the court clerk's office. It can vary, but on average, what we've seen, it's usually around $170. So I'm already, the expungement hasn't happened yet, right? Like you're still in the expungement process, and I'm describing so far on the low end, almost $1,000 of cost that someone would have to pay to just to get their record cleared. And again, that's on the low end. Then you have the final step. You have to pay to serve the final expungement documents to each of the various people entities, government entities that have to seal the record. So let's say you were arrested I live in Tulsa County. If you're arrested in Tulsa County, your lawyer, or you, if you're doing it yourself, would have to file something to have the Tulsa City Police, if it was the city police that arrested you, seal that record in their record repository, to have the court that case was in seal their record. You'd have to have made sure that OSBI had the process to seal their record. And if there was, for example, which happens sometimes, if you were arrested by the city police, but detained by the county, if there was that transfer off, then you might actually also have to serve notice to the sheriff's department of your county, as well as the municipal police. That's a lot of steps. That is a really difficult process. And one of the things that we discovered at OK Policy when we started researching this is it is it's not technically impossible, but it is pretty close to impossible to do all of those steps successfully without an attorney.
Absolutely. And some of the folks we at the Urban League work in the space of expungement and had a chance to do one of the largest in the state last year, had over 600 people here at the Urban League. And since then, have become one of the places we probably had another 600 individuals reach out to us after the Expungement Expo seeking help. One of the things that I found interesting that a couple of attorneys shared with me is that most people have a notion that an expungement is actually like, if you actually got through all those steps, that the state, then you have a right, or the state then will grant you an expungement. And some attorneys have said to me that actually Oklahoma doesn't actually offer a guarantee of expungement. Could you give us some insight there?
Yeah, I mean, that's the truth. Oklahoma does not offer a guarantee of expungement just because so much of it has to do with outdated data systems. because these systems don't communicate well. It is OSBI can tell you that in their record repository, they will seal it. And court clerks are supposed to, abide by the court order and seal it as well. It is entirely possible that, as I said, the sheriff's department, that the municipal police, that other courts of record, and if there are private purchasers of those records, it is entirely possible that the records could continue to live in those spaces. And that's just that a lot of that has to do with the fact that we haven't updated a lot of these data systems, for 20 years. So modern computer tools, I think, can change a lot of this.
Exactly. And just one other thing I would ask is there an effect? We at the Urban League serve largely, mostly Black and Brown, the Black and Brown community in Oklahoma City. Is there when we think about communities of color, do they face a different experience with trying to get an experience?
Absolutely. I mean, beyond the fact that we just start with the racial wealth gap, right? If it is easier to access an expungement if you are a rich kid from, the Paseo district in Oklahoma City than it is if you are a kid from a low income community in North Tulsa or in, southeastern Oklahoma City. That in itself is a barrier, right? The economic barrier. And that's something that is faced by Black and Brown communities and also low income rural communities across this state. The other piece is just the inherent racial disparities that we see in Oklahoma's incarceral system and justice system at large, right? Black Oklahomans are more than 4 times more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts. And those disparities for Native American women, for those in communities of Hispanic descent, those disparities are pronounced there as well. So all of those barriers to education, employment, and to housing that I described as the reason why people are so desperate to get expungements in the first place, all of those barriers are faced to a greater extent by communities of color in Oklahoma.
Great. Interesting question, and want to give shout out to my team here at the Urban League, Ms. Skylar Parker, who's helping us today, and Shanice Huff, who actually helps coordinate this. I actually had the chance a year ago to start this process without them. And I just thought, when I originally thought you just host an expungement expo and boom, on the spot, you can get it. You can get your records expunged. And what I've learned is that there's not a lot of reality, especially when you say you're helping people get their records expunged, of how long the process takes. So could you give us some insight into how long the current expungement process can take in the state of Oklahoma?
Well, a lot depends on the nature of your offense, right? That's another piece in Oklahoma. So there are waiting periods for certain offenses, depending on what it is. Some offenses, obviously, if they're serious enough, require a pardon, and that's a particular legal process. So there are a lot of details in that that you just, that's the very first time requirement. You have to have served whatever the statutory requirement for that particular offense is before you are eligible for an expungement. Then when you actually get to the place of getting an expungement, the first question is, how much money do you have, right? Do you have the money to have paid all your fines and fees, to, pay all the costs that we described? And if so, the average expungement, when we spoke to OSBI, they said that they could get an expungement if it was pushed through and all the pieces were in place through, on average, within 6 months.
Mhm.
within about 3 to 6 months on average. That's like kind of the time frame. But you'll notice that was a very conditional sentence that I said, right?
Yeah.
They can get all those things done if you have enough money to pay the cost that I described, and you happen to have met, that very narrow set of conditions to access the eligibility.
And I will say this too, having navigated the process, because you deal with so many different agencies, you almost have to work with people who have relationships in each of those agencies because none of them move by the other's time clock. They move by
Exactly.
their own individual time clock. So 6 months can easily turn into 8 months, which can easily turn into a year if there are roadblocks or do-overs or those kinds of things. So that's very interesting. Could you tell us, because I know particularly, and we'll talk the second half of this conversation about all about Clean Slate Initiative. I'm so excited to get there. Could you talk about what are some of the what are some of the areas of offenses that are expungible, and what has created a great sense of opportunity for people to have their records expunged in Oklahoma, like some recent policy changes?
Yeah, so there's been a number of big policy changes that I'm sure anyone who's lived in Oklahoma probably has seen news articles about and that kind of thing. Most of the offenses that are expungible in Oklahoma are lower level offenses. So that is nonviolent offenses generally. That's what they call 85% crimes. That is crimes that you have to serve 85% of the sentence for. So it's crimes that aren't those. Typically, that is things like misdemeanors, where a certain amount of time has passed. That is things like acquittals and dismissals, non-filed charges, that kind of thing. Though those are all eligible for expungement, and probably the biggest that you saw in the news most recently was a recent justice reform called State Question 780 that
Mhm.
made felonies like simple drug possession and a number of other low-level addiction-related property crimes. It made those misdemeanors instead of felonies. If you don't know much about the system, a misdemeanor means it is an offense that's less serious. You can't typically go to prison for a misdemeanor. You can only go to a county jail. And usually it's supposed to be for a term of incarceration that's less than a year, generally speaking. For a misdemeanor. And so changing all of those offenses from felonies to misdemeanors also meant that there was a population of people in prison who had the opportunity to have some relief and have their prison sentences reduced. So what you probably saw in the news was the largest single day commutation in American
Mhm.
history that happened
Mhm.
here in our own state of Oklahoma just a couple of years ago, a fairly remarkable event. What people didn't realize, what a lot of folks didn't recognize at that same time, the legislation that our governor and the lawmakers signed into law that made that big historic newsworthy event happen also carried a new expungement process for anyone who had those lower level felonies, like simple drug possession, and a number of addiction related lower level property crimes. So now those offenses would also be eligible for expungement relief as well, based on this new law. And so those have been really profound changes. Low estimates of the population that has been impacted by that recent change in the law, the simple possession law and other pieces. It's estimated that there's somewhere between 65 and 100,000 Oklahomans that are eligible for some kind of expungement relief under that law.
Great, that's fantastic news. I also think we get a lot of people who want to know, um, as a first step, I think anyone that goes through this process has to have an OSBI background check. Like, what are the how would one go about getting that background check so they can start the process to see if they even qualify?
So if you go on OSBI's website,
Mhm.
there's a system where you can actually apply for it online. It's called the CHIRP system. You basically put out fill in your email address and other, basic identifying information, and you will have to, depending on the nature of the request, right? There are different kinds of criminal records checks. If you want to do a general record check, then you do have to pay a $15 fee for that on the online portal. But you pay that fee, and then they email you back your criminal record. And you can utilize that either with an attorney or look through it just to look for your record to see what is eligible.
Great. That's all really good news. And I would say too, if you want information beyond this conversation today, and I'll say this throughout, head over to our website at urbanleagueok.org. And we have a page, the Community Convening and Social Justice page, and there's information there, or you can leave us information and we can follow up with you. Or I would say visit, as I often do in my work here at the Urban League, the Oklahoma Policy Institute's webpage. You will find information there, contact information that you can reach out to the Policy Institute. And they are really great about directing people in the right direction. And, I can't say enough what it's meant to have people like Damion in our state, because here at the Urban League, we moved some big rocks around expungement and really garnered some great support. But with almost anything you do, you have to prove the statistics behind it. And they've been great at as well, putting the information out there so that when folks like the Urban League want to apply to get funding and support, we've got the ready statistics to go, this is the real problem. And this is where we, from an educational standpoint, this is why we need to do what we need to do. And so I want to say thank you personally. And the Urban League staff says thank you. And we're going to probably go into the second part of the conversation talking about this amazing initiative. I had a chance to serve in the Oklahoma legislature. I would love for Damion to not only just go into what Clean Slate Initiative is, but also talk about this unusual connection and partnership with people that don't usually partner that's happening in our state. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a fairly remarkable moment in Oklahoma. I think our national politics is so caught up in partisan combat and fighting all of the time. I think we can forget that on the state and local level, other things are possible. So last year, Oklahoma Policy and the project I work on, Prosper OK, began exploring the possibility of bringing what's called a clean slate system to the state of Oklahoma. Just by way of explanation, clean slate just means a computerized system that takes the current paper expungement process, and it makes the whole thing digital. And so instead of having to get a lawyer and pay all of this money and do all of these things, there's literally a computer system that takes every court case, everyone's criminal records, and looks for cases that would be eligible under certain circumstances. And I can get a little more into the weeds in that, as you all want to kind of go through those details. But our primary partners really cross the gamut of the political spectrum. So, you've got left-leaning groups like the ACLU and Still She Rises that are supporting this work. And then you've got right groups like Americans for Prosperity and Right on Crime and OCPA, Prison Fellowship Ministries that are also supporting this work. So it's a fairly remarkable coalition of people all coming together I think with the idea that this is just common sense, finding a way to make it easier for the estimates are over 100,000 Oklahomans could currently access expungement if we build this system. So that's 100,000 people having barriers to education, employment, and housing removed by a computer system. And the real beauty of it is because of this pandemic funding, we can do all of this at little to no cost to the Oklahoma taxpayer. A lot of this, the building of these computer systems can be subsidized by pandemic relief funds. So it really is one of those just opportunities where we can do something pretty remarkable in ways that I think no one might have expected, but just the sort of the winds of how things moved kind of came together in a really special way.
How did that happen? I mean, like, how did those groups get behind something like this?
I think we all started seeing the opportunity. Last year, there was a fairly significant driver's license reform that passed, and some of the coalition groups that were involved, of course, Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform, a number of our partner groups that are based in the coalition were involved in advancing that bill. And we had heard that the governor, Governor Stitt, was particularly interested in exploring more expungement. And so the moment we knew those facts that we had, possibly a willing governor, and we had a political situation where there were people across the spectrum kind of working in our coalition together pretty well. Several of us began kind of having the conversations with other states that have already done this, and so we reached out to Utah, Michigan, Pennsylvania, other states that have built the system. And I think we all realized, I think this might be possible here. We might have the pieces to make it real. And I think the more pragmatic it became, the more it became like, hey, the pieces may be here. I think that's really where the momentum began to go.
And I think that in my time in the legislature, I was able to serve there for almost 11 years. I'm always very fascinated that solutions can be found and don't necessarily have to be partisan, but particularly I applaud this group because this solution brings together individuals who live in rural counties, individuals who live in urban communities, and really coalesces you behind one push or one movement forward. I can remember working on educational policy when I was in the legislature. There were so many things that my rural friends who represented rural areas in terms of their schools, they had the same challenges that I had in an inner city urban district. And we found common ground around some things that were unique, even though our communities were very different. So I applaud you for bringing folks around, because the more you can have those kinds of situations, the greater opportunities for even bigger rocks to be moved in the legislature that normally wouldn't see individuals working together, like in this particular instance. I'd love to know who will find themselves eligible for this Clean Slate Initiative.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is pretty close to that list that I was kind of walking through earlier. We've sort of stuck with the existing expungement eligibility categories and just kind of gone through them and taken a few of them. So if you have an arrest record that was dismissed, that case was never prosecuted, and that arrest record's just hanging out there, you will be eligible for a clean slate expungement, especially if that's your only record. You just have an arrest record hanging out there, you will be eligible. If you have an acquittal, and just a pure acquittal, you will be eligible for a clean slate expungement. if you have a misdemeanor record, a low-level misdemeanor offense, and the time period has elapsed, it's different for different particular offenses. But if that time period is elapsed and your term has served, you will be technically eligible for a clean slate expungement. And then that last category of people who have recently reclassified felonies. So if you have an older felony, like simple drug possession, that is now a misdemeanor, that older felony will be eligible for clean slate expungement.
That's amazing. Could you help help us understand as well, sort of, if I'm an individual that might find themselves eligible for the Clean Slate Initiative, will I still need to access an attorney or?
Not for that. What you will need to do, people will still need to check their criminal history, do their background check. And what we're probably going to do is a large state campaign for folks to check their record. In that first year after the system comes out, we may even do some public-private philanthropic situations with a lot of the public defender's offices and diversion offices in a number of counties to have folks checking their records so that they will know that they were able to receive some relief.
Great. I think as we were getting ready for this, one of the questions for individuals, a few of the questions from individuals is, where is this legislation right now? Could you give us a legislative update?
Absolutely. So the bill number is House Bill 3316. And it is currently it has passed Senate appropriations. It actually passed that unanimously last week. And it is about to be heard for a Senate floor vote. That is all the senators instead of just senators in the committee. It'll be heard for a Senate floor vote probably next week. So sometime, I would bet, before next Wednesday. If I had to bet on it. It hasn't been scheduled yet, but it's likely to be scheduled sometime next week. And so after that vote, the bill would be headed to the governor to be signed into law. So
great. That sounds good. Smaller terminology from my days in the legislature. So the title is on the bill?
So right now the title is off, but it's only off because it was in appropriations. I mean, this is getting a little in the weeds. If you know Senator Roger Thompson, he takes the title off every bill that comes through appropriations until the appropriation is settled. And then once it's settled, once it's time for a floor vote, the title will go back on. And then the Senate floor will be allowed to vote.
Great. I hated to take everybody through that, but there's a better way to say it. Is it live right now, or do we need to make it live? And it sounds like it's on its way to being live. And it's not unusual for a bill to not be live until it's finished or a work in progress. And then, so to speak, they make it live and send it through for a final vote and on to the governor. So I'm excited to hear that. One of the questions that we had come to us is, it passes, the governor signs it. How long will it take them to build?
You might need to repeat that question one more time, Jabari.
Okay, did I
froze for just a moment?
No worries. How long will it take for this bill to go into effect, for the system to be built, for this to be operational?
So it will take us 3 years to build the Clean Slate system. It'll be 2025 when the system will be deployed. So it'll be that 2025 to 2026 year that will really be doing the pretty intensive public push to to raise public
Mhm.
awareness and let people know exactly how the system's going to work and what their eligibility options are. The really good piece of that, while we're building this system, we're going to be trying to gather and strengthen the data that the court system uses right now to
Mhm.
really try and deal with some of those issues that you were describing, where people can't be certain if their expungement will actually be granted and those other pieces. One of the things that we want to do is really build up these data systems to evidence-based best practices. And the other thing that we're definitely going to work on is, once we get this system constructed and processed, we are really going to try and add more eligibility criterion to Clean Slate. So one of the things that we want to do is expand this in a number of different ways moving forward.
That's awesome. And if I'm an individual sort of in need of an expungement, we're talking a 3-year wait. What do I do in the meantime? How do I go about trying to get through
Yeah.
this process?
So I'm really grateful for groups like yours, the Urban League, who are doing such amazing work, really on the local level. There's several groups that have been involved in a similar effort in Tulsa County as
Mhm.
well. I've heard that the city of Lawton is looking into doing something. One of the things that we want to do, now that Oklahoma is a clean slate campaign state, is really try and organize and help put together large scale mass expungement events
Mhm.
for people. And so it's one of the things that we're going to be trying to pull together on a more regular basis in the next few years, just working with those stakeholders, the courts, and all the various people who have to be at the table to make it happen. So that's one of the things that we're trying to pull together. The other is that there are a number of counties that are now having specialized expungement services in their public defender's office. So I would start, whatever county you're in, reach out to Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma, because they will often do some pro bono expungement work, depending. Pro bono just means for free.
Mhm.
Expungement work depending on the nature of the case, and then reach out to your county public defender's office. It may be what's called an Oklahoma indigent defense
Mhm.
attorney. But still reach out to that individual and see if they know anything about an expungement clinic nearby. There are
Mhm.
several that have been established just in the last 2 years. Tulsa County has started a pretty significant one only in the past year. And so those are really good resources that I think are going to help while we're building this system to give a few more people access.
That's great news. I know in our work and what we do, we we really find so many people who have had incidents in other counties and other places, and it'd be so great to have like a unifying system across the state that we can help individuals. Want our viewers and those that view this, that as we get more information, I know Tulsa is their expungement expo is going to be back on track this summer. Don't have the dates, but please check our website again at urbanleagueok.org for information. And I just got a little bit more information about making sure that I explain that when you go to that website, the Urban League's website, you want to go to the community convening and social justice page, and they will have a sort of a click for criminal justice reform. Go to that space and you'll find more information, and we'll be updating information as we get a chance. And we're not finished one. So we are back with Damion from Oklahoma Policy Institute in Really Prosper, Oklahoma. He's a project manager there, working on some serious legislation and serious actions around criminal justice reform. We were in the middle in our last segment of talking about the impact made by us being able to help people move beyond their current challenges and situations through really going through the process of getting a clean slate or getting an expungement. I mean, do you want to finish out on what this could mean for individuals and communities and our state, really?
Yeah, thanks so much again for talking about this important issue. I think it really just comes down to families in Oklahoma and their opportunity to have the best life that they can and, really
Mhm,
be able to thrive. We know the unemployment rate for justice involved Oklahomans is 5 times the national average. We know that justice involved Oklahomans are 10 times more likely to experience homelessness than the national average. And we know that estimates of the economic benefits of an expungement. Within a year of an expungement, the average recipient experiences a 22% increase in their salary, and
mhm,
underemployment also decreases appreciably. If you estimate that out to the population that we're looking at impacting with this clean slate bill, that's billions of dollars of economic activity for Oklahoma,
mhm.
contributing to our GDP, making our families stronger, our communities stronger. And then there's the personal piece of it that I always think of. Right now, if you're a 19-year-old kid with parents who are affluent from some big city in larger city in Oklahoma, if you make a mistake when you're 19, it will be gone by the time that you're 30, right? If you
Mhm,
struggle with addiction like lots of people do, for example, and get caught by the cops when you're 19, if your parents have money, that record will be gone by the time you're 30.
mhm,
Why can't a 19-year-old from North Tulsa have that, whose parents don't have much money?
mhm,
Why can't a 19-year-old kid from some rural county, who grew up working on farms or who grew up in his and working in his small town or her small town, why can't they have that? That's the opportunity that we're hoping to bring to more Oklahomans, to say it doesn't matter how much money your parents make. If when were 19 or 20 or however old you were, when you made that mistake that ended you up on the wrong side of the law, if you're willing to do the right thing and try and turn your life around, you deserve the same benefit that rich kids get. Everyone deserves the same system of justice, regardless of how much money they make.
That is beautiful. I would almost want to end right there, but I don't want to end without giving the folks who might look at this a chance to know how they might be able to help you as you quarterback this significant piece of legislation through the legislative process in Oklahoma. How can our folks who are looking at this, how can the Urban League be a help to you?
Well, thank you all so much for all the work that you're doing to better our community. None of this would be possible without partners who are really in the trenches doing the work like you all are doing every day. I would direct your listeners to our website. We have a new
Mhm.
action page. It is action.prosperok.org. That is action.prosperok.org. And when you click on that, you can learn more about the Clean Slate Initiative. You can learn more about our fines and fees initiatives. And if you click on the sign up page, you will get email and text alerts depending on what you want. You sign up for it, so it's an opt-in system. But whenever we need people to go to the Capitol and call and really talk to their lawmakers and tell them what kind of a criminal justice system they want in Oklahoma, that's the place where you can really get that information. I would also tell folks to sign up for OK Policies daily and weekly newsletter, In the Know, just a great source of information and direction on what's happening in our state.
Great. I want to again thank you, Damion, for just your leadership, for the impact you made in our state, for moving these issues forward. I want to say to our listeners, please visit our website at urbanleagueok.org. I'm going to make sure that we get on our website, on our page, information around both the Policy Institute hopefully a way to just easily click a link and head to that web page so that you can get signed up for all of the information there, but also directly to the information you gave us just recently here about how to get to the action site, the landing page that will help individuals know where this legislation is moving, and how they can become part of what I think is a movement in Oklahoma, really inspired by people like yourself, to, as my grandmother would say, not just do things right, but to do, their mother used to say to me all my life, and that is, we got to do the right thing. And this is the right thing for our state and the right thing for our folks. Head over to urbanleagueok.org. Under those programs, select community convening and social justice, and then click on criminal justice reform. You'll have all kinds of information, including what we talked about today. There, you can register and apply for our Expungement Expo, which will happen, our second annual Expungement Expo, on June 25th. That's urbanleagueok.org, and please join us here at the Urban League, our second annual Expungement Fair, June 25th. And Damion, if you're over in the area, come on over. If there was, we like to say that's our day to kind of celebrate these individuals that are going to get a new, really opportunity in life. And if we're celebrating, we'll make you, if it's a parade, we'll make you the king of the chance on the 25th, and everybody else. And with that,
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
have a good evening.
Bye, everyone.